asking me, literally, what's the truth versus what the narrative says?
It's an inside job for sure. Don't be foolish that all of a sudden they broke in 15 different places in the fence and nobody showed up for 8 hours.
I'll be honest, I'm a little bit nervous about this one.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Jay Slay Made in the USA, where we explore truth, expose deception, and inspire courage. Guys, I've got a great show for you today. I'm really excited about this one. I'd like to welcome San Francisco area Bay architect Richard Gage, AIA, back on the show. He's a member of the American Institute of Architects and founder and former CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He now leads the charge for a new World Trade Center investigation, along with his courageous wife, Gail, at richardgage911.org. And all of the links we discussed today will be in the description. Richard has recently also bravely been diving into the parallels between the October 7th attack and 9/11, which, as my viewing audience understands, this is an incredibly important and linked topic for understanding modern geopolitics. I believe that Richard is a true hero of the truth movement. So let's please welcome back Richard Gage, AIA architect, back on the show.
Hey, Jeremy.
Hey there. Thanks for coming back on, man. We're so glad to have you.
Oh, it's my honor. Really great to be here with you.
Well, let's start off with some current events, current developments. Last time you were here was, I think we did it the day after 9/11 of 2023. So we're getting close to a year and a half of time has passed since then. So tell us about developments on your end and with the movement. Anything you'd like to highlight?
Oh, my God. There's so much. We have former Congressman Curt Weldon, for instance, having spoken with J.D. Vance and Pete Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard about 9/11 and getting a real investigation, because he's been looking into the intelligence failures, but now he's looking into the evidence for the explosive demolition of all three towers. So he's asked us, leaders in the 9/11 Truth Movement, to compile a set of our best evidence, which we've done under the leadership of Captain Raul Angulo of the Seattle Fire Department, who's written articles now in major journals of firefighting, which attracted Curt Weldon's, who was a fire chief formerly before he was a congressman.
Okay.
And this is now going tomorrow or the next day to Curt and to be given to these leaders in the Trump team for a new investigation. We're calling for a presidential commission. It's called Task Force 8. And so it's got wheels. It's got, the wheels are moving here. Pretty exciting.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, we have Congressman Paulina Luna, who along with the leader of the House Oversight Committee, James Comer, they gave a press conference a week ago, and they're calling now not only for an investigation of Martin Luther King, JFK, and RFK, but also Epstein and COVID origins and 9/11 also. They've added that. That wasn't even in the original executive order of President Trump. So we're all excited that it got out there. I mean, how can she stuff this genie back into the bottle now, having released it? The whole 9/11 Truth Movement is all over her. So we hope this is going to be something real that's released and investigated, not just another limited hangout.
With someone like Anna Paulina Luna being put in charge, per se, of releasing the documents, whatever the documents are, why exactly do you need a person to And when would that timeline be in terms of a release? And there's a lot of people online, including myself, that have some doubts about what are they trying to do here? Do they want to scrub information first before they give it out to the public? What's your take?
I can't know many of those things, though she did say 9/11 would follow these other investigations, so it may be a year or more. They're going into Epstein and COVID, but her intentions are unknown. But the fact is that she did put it out there publicly, which legitimizes the question.
Right.
Because Congress has said they're going to reinvestigate it. So now we can talk about it in polite circles without being called as much a conspiracy theorist, right?
Right. Among other labels. Well, I definitely want to circle back to some of that and what that could look like, and maybe reasons for different things, and reasons that our government has pretty much purposefully turned a very blind eye. I mean, going back to the early days of the 9/11 Commission report and just the way they went about it all, which I know you're going to touch on some of that during your presentation. I'd really like, unless you've got other things you'd like to hit on before you dive in, I'm ready to get the show on the road with the presentation.
Oh, let's do it, because we did have an in-depth dive a year and a half ago, and this evidence is now for a review. We'll take about an hour to go through it. For those of you who are unfamiliar with it, buckle up, because this is earth-shattering information, which woke me up 18 years ago when I first heard it from David Ray Griffin from an interview that he did on KPFA in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was just shocked to learn, for instance, that a third tower came down on 9/11. I was shocked to learn most of the evidence we're going to be discussing here. So my guess is that you may be as well, if you're not familiar and you haven't been paying attention to the millions in the 9/11 truth movement.
Absolutely. I did think of one question right then. Has there been any new technical information that maybe you wouldn't have had in your presentation a year and a half ago, like new evidence or something that's come to light?
The evidence is substantially the same. I keep finding little pieces of it and putting it in my presentation. For instance, we have Richard Rotans, the deputy director of Building 7's Emergency Operations Center, coming out and saying an elevator was blown out of its hoistway and sitting 30 feet down the hallway, an elevator cab. Pretty incredible information. So we're going to be talking about that too.
Okay. Well, let's jump in. Do you know how to do the screen share?
Yeah. So, Jeremy, I was saying that I didn't know about this building whatsoever, and I'm an architect. In fact, I'm one of 90,000 members of the American Institute of Architects, and we didn't get one bulletin on this, the third worst structural failure in modern history, after the Twin Towers. So this should have been the most studied structural failure ever. I mean, this is the tallest building in most of our states, dwarfed next to the Twin Towers, of course, which were built in the early 70s, completed then. And but man, the building wasn't hit by a plane, and yet it went down anyway. It's a football field in length away from the North Tower. And it had a little bit of damage when the towers came down, but NIST, here it is standing just fine. NIST tells us, they're the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They tell us, the damage was not a significant factor in this building's collapse. Well, what was? Let's look at the collapse. Here it is coming down. In an isolated incident, the east penthouse in the upper left came down, and then 6 seconds after that, the entire building does this. So we have to ask ourselves, isn't it? Have we ever seen this before? Well, yeah, we'll do some comparisons. But what did NIST say about the official narrative here from their perspective? This is Shyam Sunder from NIST.
What we found was that uncontrolled building fires caused an extraordinary event. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fire.
Fires. Okay, so fires did that to this building. Let's look at those fires. These are the worst fires that we have any evidence of. And they're few, they're small, and they're scattered throughout the building. So they're not even burning on the floor of interest to NIST, which is the 12th floor up there. This floor, the photos show that they've burned out on that floor, while NIST claims that they're still going and raging. But this proves that they're not. In fact,
Right.
we've never lost a steel frame fire protected structure ever in history. These type 1 construction for high rises is incredibly robust. Not even after 9/11 and these fully engulfed high rises have we lost one of them, not one. Well, what have we lost? We've lost buildings when they set explosives in them. On the left, a series of known controlled demolitions. On the right, building 7. Is there any similarity? Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives, especially since fire, the official cause of this building's collapse, has never in history brought down a steel frame fire protected structure ever? So we have to ask ourselves, does it have any of the features, typical features of controlled demolition? Yeah, let's go through them. We have a sudden onset of destruction. Let's listen to Dan Rather watching his first view of this on 9/11.
What you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself.
Describe that.
Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
What was that, Jeremy? Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down. Well, Dan's using his intuition here. We all should.
Yes.
Problem is, he never repeated that and after 9/11, and we've never seen this building come down, with like maybe 2 exceptions. So let's see if there's a straight down symmetrical collapse. Let's look from West Street. Yeah, pretty straight down, pretty symmetrical. How do they accomplish that? They have to take out all the core columns within a fraction of a second of each other, followed about a second later by the perimeter columns. That brings the outside of the structure onto the inside. So they get a nice, neat pile that we'll be looking at. So can these fires accomplish that level of precision? That's a pretty simple question that a 5th grader can answer. So what do we have in terms of the speed of this collapse? Well, David Chandler, physics teacher, demonstrates very clearly it came down at free fall acceleration. What does that mean? That's the building's getting faster and faster every second. Nothing is slowing it down. It's as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky. Well, the bowling ball had no resistance under it. This building had 40,000 tons of structural steel supporting it. What happened to all of that steel in this incredibly robust building? Even NIST acknowledges, yeah, well, after 5 years, yeah, it came down at free fall. And they even graph it for us. A third of its 7-second fall is at free fall, which means what? Not one of these columns gave any resistance for at least a third of that building's collapse. Well, where did they go? Can fire have taken them out all at once? No. So we look at what happened to those columns. They result in they're totally dismembered. It falls in like a house of cards in a haystack pile, 4 or 6 stories tall. This was a moment resisting steel frame and X-braced building. And it falls just as if that structure all gave way at once. Structures that collapse, in this case, naturally due to earthquakes, the building is recognizable as a building. The columns and beams are not severed one from another. The concrete is not pulverized to a fine powder. So all of a sudden these fires can do all of that to the building? So what can? Let's look at witnesses, which might give us a clue. NIST says there are no witnesses of explosions. Yet here's half a dozen, beginning with Daryl, a medical student.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was. It looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out. And it was horrifying. And then about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground.
Sound of a clap of thunder, a shock wave ripping through the building, the windows busting out, and then the building coming down. What did Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic, experience?
You heard explosions, like boom. It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when in compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
Okay, and Bill Rosati.
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere, chaotic like.
Okay, and Captain Richard Patterson of the FDNY.
1-7 let go as well, and was a series of concussive explosions.
Okay, and we talked about Richard Rotans earlier, the deputy director of the Emergency Operations Center. He found in his inspection around noon of this building, which was actually on fire already, but he found explosions blowing out a second floor, a whole piece of a floor with columns dangling, and an elevator cab blown 30 to 40 feet down the hall out of the hoistway. So huge, huge explosions. And Barry Jennings here, who, along with Michael Hess, were called to a meeting after the first plane hit the tower. And this is their experience trying to get out of that building, which had been evacuated by everybody else, but they didn't realize that. This is their experience on the way back down.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor. I heard some more explosions.
What's the sound?
Like a boom, like an explosion.
More than one?
Yes. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. When we get outside, a police officer comes to me and says, "You have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run."
Bombs in the building like this heard by these first responders?
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
In the vicinity of Building 7. So something else is going on here. In fact, let's look at the examples of foreknowledge, because these mysterious construction workers are walking away from Building 7 and hear an explosion over their shoulder, look back at the building, and then look straight into the CNN camera saying this.
You hear that?
If you're in that building, it's coming down.
The building is about to blow up. Move it back.
All right, guys.
We are walking back. There's a building about to blow up. On flame, debris coming down.
The building is about to blow up, flame and debris coming down. How do they know? Wow. So
At the last few seconds.
What did Kevin McPadden experience? He had heard about, he was a witness of explosions, but before he heard those explosions, he is listening to a radio held in the hands of a Red Cross worker, because they're all held back about 6 blocks away, and because they're told it was going to come down. This is what he hears from the radio.
At the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1.
What? Do fires bring buildings down to countdowns? What is really going on here? This is pretty darn unusual stuff. How about the BBC announcing the collapse of this building 20 minutes before it happened?
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago, I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were. And it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy.
Sketchy indeed. we have, what does this make them psychic? They apologize for this grievous error, citing the confusing events of the day. What's really going on here? Unbelievable. And we have the experts agreeing. One of the foremost controlled demolition companies in Europe.
Danny Jowenko is the expert on this in Europe. What did he say?
Dit is controlled demolition. Zeker weten. Zeker weten. Er is nagesprongen. Dit is in opdracht gebeurd. Het heeft een team gedaan van experts.
What, a team of experts did this? He has no doubt whatsoever. How about one of the 36 structural engineers signed on to the petition demanding a new investigation, including Kamal Obaid in California? A localized failure in a steel frame building like WTC7 cannot cause a catastrophic collapse like a house of cards without a simultaneous and patterned loss of several of its columns at key locations within the building.
Mm-hmm.
Does that sound like something that those fires are going to accomplish? No. So what could accomplish that? Let's look at the evidence of extreme heat provided to us by a number of official sources, including the metallurgical examination of the steel by FEMA in their May of 2002 Building Performance Assessment Team report, in which they document never before observed eutectic reactions, intergranular melting capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese, like you see in this piece of World Trade Center 7 steel. Fire doesn't do this to steel. Fire doesn't burn steel. Jet fuel doesn't burn steel, as we'll see. What else do they document? Rapid oxidation, sulfidation. Liquid iron, that's molten iron, by the way. That's 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Sulfur formed during this hot corrosion attack on the steel. This is very in-depth investigation. In fact, New York Times called this evidence perhaps the deepest mystery uncovered, and yet it's completely ignored and omitted by NIST. The presence of sulfur indicates possible demolition, of course, with thermite, but NIST says the sulfur is present in the gypsum wallboard. So maybe that's what attacked the steel. But no, gypsum wallboard contains inert calcium sulfate. It's never in its 100-year history turned around and attacked the steel that it's been designed to protect. Not once. Steel members in the debris pile appear to have been partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperature, says fire protection engineer Jonathan Barnett, author of the FEMA report. But it takes 4,000 degrees to evaporate steel. But here is the evaporated steel documented by Abelhausen Nastani Azel, structural engineer given a National Science Foundation grant to study the World Trade Center steel. I saw melting of girders. Yeah, he did. And we see it right here. The liquid molten iron or steel pouring out of the material held in the crab claw excavators. We can tell what the temperature of that steel or that molten metal is. Turns out to be molten iron by the color. The color tells us we're exceeding 2,500 degrees. The problem is that jet fuel and fires only get to be less than half of that typically. In fact, the jet fuel manufacturer says, hey, our jet fuel only burns at 600 degrees maximum in open air. So,
Richard, I've got a quick question for you.
Yeah.
If you go back one slide, would that be the material they're picking up right there that they quickly shipped off to, I think, another country, maybe China?
Well, the beams that were all clearly steel and not mixed material like you inevitably have in molten iron, that's what was shipped to China, the steel, the columns and the beams for 15 cents a pound, which is a giveaway.
Okay.
That and here we have molten iron pouring out of the South Tower minutes prior to its collapse. And this says, oh, this must be molten aluminum. But molten aluminum doesn't glow bright yellow and orange in daylight conditions. So what is this? Well, let's learn something. Could thermite have produced this? What is thermite anyway?
An incendiary used by the military, thermite is a compound of iron oxide and aluminum, which when ignited sustains an extreme heat reaction, creating molten iron. In just 2 seconds, thermite can reach temperatures over 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, quite enough to liquefy steel.
Wow.
We know that open-air fires cannot burn hot enough to melt steel, but metal had melted at the base of the towers. Appendix C of the FEMA report describes sulfur residues on the World Trade Center steel. The New York Times called this the deepest mystery of all. Sulfur slightly lowers the melting point of iron, and iron oxide and iron sulfide had formed on the surface of the structural steel. Sulfur used with thermite is called thermate, producing even faster results.
Well, maybe we're getting somewhere here, because if thermite were used, it would explain the incredible temperatures, 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It would also explain the presence of sulfur, which is added to thermite to become thermate, much more effective at cutting through steel. And it would explain the presence of ignited incendiaries in the World Trade Center dust found in all of their samples by the U.S. Geological Survey, which produced their particle atlas of the World Trade Center dust in 2006, finding what? Billions of previously molten iron microspheres. Let's unpack that. Previously molten, that's 3,000 degrees. Iron is the byproduct of thermite, we just saw. And spherical, we'll come to that. But they're used as a signature component to distinguish the World Trade Center dust from common office building dust by the EPA. It's not even World Trade Center dust unless it has all of these components that we don't know what they are, these molten iron microspheres. So we have to find out what else they found. 6% of some of these dust samples are previously molten iron microspheres. And we have up to 4 tons of this material altogether by extrapolation. R.J. Lee Group found that they're formed during the event. They did an independent analysis. They're an international consulting firm, environmental consulting. So they're not before by the welders putting the building together, not afterward by the ironworkers taking the building apart, but during the event. Well, how could they happen during the event? Well, experiment is the arbiter of competing hypotheses. Let's do one. Let's light some thermite. What happens? It produces what look like sparks but which are molten iron spheres which drop and fall into the pan, showing how molten iron microspheres are formed. How do they get spherical? Well, that is what aerosolized liquids do by surface tension. They do that like raindrops falling from the sky.
Right.
So could that be what's causing the tops of these cars to be toasted? Liquid falling, small micro drops of partially cooled molten iron. Is there any other rational explanation in the official narrative? No. Then we have dust clouds that are extremely hot, showing that it gets real hot. It felt like it was going to light up almost, says this firefighter. A hot, solid black wave of heat threw me down the block. When I was running, some hot stuff went down my back. I didn't have time to put my coat on. I had 1st and 2nd degree burns on my back. And then we're engulfed in the smoke, which was horrendous. And the one thing I remember, it was hot. The smoke was hot, and that scared me. I remember making it to the tunnel, and it was this incredible amount of wind, debris, heat, a huge, huge blast of hot wind gusting and smoke and dust. This super hot wind blew, and it just got dark as night, and you couldn't breathe. So lots of testimony to the amazing heat, and all of that was evidence of ignited thermite. Is there any evidence of unignited thermite in the World Trade Center dust? Yeah, a team of 8 international scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen reviewed 7 independently collected samples, and they found that they were dual layered red-gray chips, and here we go. They are attracted by a magnet about 1/16 of an inch long. Interestingly, unlike paint chips, which they looked like, they thought they were paint because they're dual layered. So they were obviously applied as a fluid. But unlike primer paint, which is not attracted to a magnet, this stuff has an extremely high iron content. So they get real curious, and they do X-ray energy dispersive spectroscopy and find high aluminum and iron, the ingredients of thermite. What are the ingredients of thermite doing in all of these paint chips? It's pretty darn curious. So they zoom in 50,000 times with an electron microscope, and they find what? Nano-sized particles of iron and aluminum. Iron rhomboidal-shaped crystals, aluminum platelets, 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair. Well, they get real curious now. They do some research and find that this stuff was invented by Lawrence Livermore Lab before 2001 and documented. Pyrotechnic and explosive... What?
I just cleared my throat. Go ahead.
Pyrotechnic and explosive composites based on thermite reactions at the nanometer size scale. They go, wow, this stuff was already developed by the defense industry. See, when they get these particles so small at the nanoscale, the surface volume increases exponentially. And so you've engineered an incendiary, which normally works by means of heat, massive heat, 4,000 degrees, to become more explosive, like TNT or RDX. Well, interestingly, they in Lawrence Livermore Lab, when they heat this stuff up in a differential scanning calorimeter, it ignites, producing a whole lot of energy, showing that it's a thermitic material. Well, that's exactly what these chips did. This is not paint. Paint doesn't have these exotic properties. All of the chips ignited and produced what when they ignited? Molten iron microspheres with the same chemical signature as the molten iron microspheres found by the USGS and R.J. Lee and others. And so we know exactly where those microspheres came from, how they were produced. As if we didn't know, they're found attached to partially ignited red grade chips, as you see here and here. So this stuff is not made in a cave in Afghanistan. It's extremely sophisticated, made only in the most advanced defense contracting laboratory.
You're telling me Al Qaeda didn't have a big pot and they were just mixing all this stuff up in a cave somewhere and shipped it over?
Doesn't happen. In fact, this 24-page peer-reviewed paper on this study has been documented, published in 2009. They found that a red layer is active unreacted thermitic material incorporating nanotechnology. It's a highly energetic, pyrotechnic, or explosive material. So you see, we've got the goods. All of this stuff is the goods.
Yeah.
Not one of these key features can be accomplished by fire, the official cause of the building's collapse, let alone all of them. And there's some very uncharacteristic features here too, with the use of incendiaries to bring down buildings, which has happened before. There's patented devices to do just that.
Was there a difference, Richard, in the dust discovered around Building 7 as apart from the Twin Towers, or was it all mixed together so much?
It's pretty mixed together.
Okay.
Yeah. We've got dust samples on the Brooklyn Bridge on-ramp, as well as all around the World Trade Center, and they're all very, very similar. The further away you go, the fewer iron spheres there are, but they're still there. So this evidence has convinced a lot of people. This is proof of controlled demolition, including 3,600 architects and engineers signed on to the petition, staking their reputations on the line to demand a new investigation. Many of them appear in our documentary 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom, an unprecedented film series taking the hard evidence of the 9/11 crimes to court. And we have teamed with the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry and are bringing the evidence. Well, let me show you the trailer here.
No matter how improbable the conclusion may appear, when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
We're bringing alive in the film the 60 exhibits of the 9/11 WTC evidence contained in the Lawyers Committee grand jury petition that have already been submitted to the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan to present to a special criminal jury.
This historic investigation is ongoing, and there's a role for you in it. Yes, you can help us bring the real perpetrators to justice.
Through this film series, we're bringing together 24 experts in their fields.
They ignored any scenario involving incendiaries.
Demolition work, you're going to set charges on each floor.
The building could not have been brought down by office fires.
In other words, all of the interior columns over 8 stories came down, were basically lost at once.
I could make out what looked like from a science fiction movie, molten lava, okay?
And he paused and said, that'll be coming down around 5 o'clock.
We'll be filming these evidence presentations, not only for our filings with the grand jury, also as presentations to each of you.
We're inviting you to serve as virtual grand jurors during each episode.
Excellent.
So, yeah, this is a pretty exciting project. We've completed 2 episodes already. They're available on the website above my head, richardgage911.org, or right here at the film's website, which is 911c2c.org. And we're inviting everybody to co-produce the film. For as little as $10, you can be a producer of the film. For $500, we can put your name and will on the credits as an executive producer for that level of donation. So encourage everybody to participate. This is critical. We're going into the Building 7 and the Twin Towers. All this evidence that we're only highlighting today will be in more than a dozen actual episodes. So those episodes will include the Twin Towers. And as such, we'll be seeing upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying structural steel sections weighing 4 and 8 tons, laterally ejected at 80 miles an hour, landing 600 feet in every direction, destroying buildings around them, and not toppling them, but taking them, impaling them with these structural steel sections. Why are these sections trailing thick white smoke clouds? Steel is not flammable in office fire conditions or jet fuel. So how can we have all of these steel sections trailing smoke clouds? Think about that. Well, aluminum oxide ash is the byproduct of thermite, in addition to molten iron. What happens? We got molten iron and we got aluminum oxide ash in major deposits, ejections there. So we'll take a deeper look at that as we look at the standard features of the Twin Towers compared to the typical features. Well, these are not very standard at all. This one is the first one. Is there a sudden onset of destruction? Yeah. At the North Tower, we have the sudden uniform drop. It's standing still, and all of a sudden it's in uniform downward motion. Same with the South Tower. We have no jolt or hesitation upon impact of the cold, hard steel below. And so that's a dead giveaway of a controlled demolition. What happened to that cold, hard steel below? Well, NIST tells us that the upper part was so big and so heavy that it drove the rest of the building down to the ground and then destroyed itself. This is the crush down, crush up theory provided by Zdeněk Bazant of Northwestern University in Chicago. He provided an extremely complex set of mathematical equations which took 10 years for other engineers to decode. And I'll show you what happens when they did. But he submitted this just 2 days after 9/11.
Oh, perfect.
So you know, the rest of us, you and me, Jeremy, we were in shock, trying to figure out who's done this attack to us. When's the next plane coming? Yes. Right? This is not a time to sit down in our den and calculate the most complex paper ever produced for a building collapse. No. Well, and it violates has a lot of problems. One is the violation of Newton's third law of motion, which says what? There's an equal and opposite destruction when two bodies collide. Run a Mack truck into a Volkswagen. Who wins? The Mack truck, right? Does it matter if we drop the Volkswagen onto the Mack truck? No. The top part, the lightest part of a structure cannot possibly destroy the cold, hard, heavier, intact steel below, because it does get heavier, these columns, and heavier they do as you go down until you're 30 inches by 16 inches at mid-height, and then it turns to 52 inches by 22 inches, almost solid steel at the base of the structure. Are these going to destroy all of these? No, not going to happen. So let's look at that pile driver and see what's actually happening. Is the top part destroying the bottom part? Well, let's zoom in and take a look this way. Watch the bottom red line at the point of plane impacts. The top part is not driving the rest of the part down. It's telescoping in on itself. It's being destroyed itself. What's destroying it? We'll get to that. But if it were there, we would see it. In none of the photos or videos do we see a top part driving the rest of the building down to the ground. No. And if it were, it would have destroyed these few remaining core columns that stand 800 feet in the air for 6 seconds. and until they have an explosion, and then they drop frame by frame through the concrete powder that's been shaken off of them. Now, what do we see? I mean, which one's the volcanic eruption and which one's the North Tower, right?
Oh,
It's
boy.
kind of hard to tell.
Yeah.
Upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying structural steel sections, and in this case, molten solid objects in each case, trailed by thick white smoke clouds. Okay, you give up. It's the volcanic eruption is on the right.
I forgot you were even asking me the question, because it is so mesmerizing to
Isn't
see the level at which it was planned, where they knew we have to create such a catastrophic event in the demolition itself that the whole thing it's not recognizable. I mean, they turned it into powder. I mean, the buildings were turned into powder.
Yeah, lots of concrete powder, and we're going to talk about that. But we're told that the top part crushed the bottom part, but obviously, given what we just saw with these few remaining columns 800 feet in the air, the top part didn't crush them. So the top part did not crush the bottom part and then crush itself. We're looking at something very different here. And John Cole developed this excellent drawing to reveal that we have an outward explosion. So it's out and down, not down and out. So let's see what could produce that. Well, explosions can produce that. Turns out there's 156 witnesses from among the first responders, expert witnesses, of explosions that were recorded just a month after 9/11. And we didn't have access to this until August of 2005 because the city was withholding it from us. But finally, they were sued by the New York Times, and all of these 12,000 pages of testimony were put on the New York Times website. And Graham McQueen, the late professor, read all of them. And he found 156 first responders like this. We felt the ground shake. You could see the tower sway, and then it just came down. All of a sudden, the ground just started shaking. Felt like a train running under my feet. The next thing we know, we look up, and the tower is collapsing. Shook my bones. Shortly before the first tower came down, I remember feeling the ground shaking, heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. I saw a flash, flash, flash in the lower level of the building. You know, like when they demolish a building, with each popping sound, initially an orange, and then a red flash came out of the building. Then it would just go all around the building on both sides. Saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. He saw about 6 of these brief flashes, accompanied by a crackling sound before the tower collapsed. Saw low-level flashes. Saw flash, flash, flash. And then it looked like the building came down. An explosion appeared at the very top. Simultaneously, from all 4 sides, materials shot out horizontally. And then there seemed to be a momentary delay before you could see the beginning of the collapse. How specific do these expert witnesses need to be before we take them seriously? We'll jump to the feature number 3, a straight down symmetrical collapse. Is that what we have here? Well, it starts out actually to fall over. In fact, it's falling off the South Tower at 22 degrees. So we would expect, given that we have asymmetrical loading from this part that's falling off the building, asymmetrical damage from the fires, asymmetrical damage from the plane impacts, how in the world then do we get complete symmetrical destruction all the way around each face, traveling as fast, almost as fast as a bowling ball down falling from the sky? Well, let's zoom into the leading corner and ask what we're looking at. In this looped video, I see about 12, a dozen independently detonations, independent detonations. This is not, by the way, a nuclear weapon going off. These are relatively small, though hundreds of them, independent floor by floor, precisely timed and precisely placed explosives. That's all this can be. Nor is it directed energy weapons, which don't do this. They don't do anything we've been looking at, by the way. So let's look at the isolated explosive ejections called squibs in the controlled demolition industry, occurring as far down as 20 stories, 40 stories. They even occur much further down, for which there's no explanation in the official narrative, 60 stories down below. No explanation at all, nor for these squibs, which are simultaneously, a dozen of them coming off the left side of the South Tower before it begins to lean to the right.
Can you define a squib in terms of controlled demolitions? What is it?
It's an isolated explosive ejection occurring in places where you might not expect it. Maybe they're mistimed. In this case, I believe they're part of the hundreds and hundreds of explosives that are taking the rigidity out of this upper section, so that it can't fall off and roll off the bottom section as a rigid object and fall to the street below. It's almost like a fluid. Its structure's been so compromised that it settles back down in on itself. So we got to ask ourselves, how fast are they falling? Well, David Chandler, physics teacher, again, says this is almost 2/3 of free fall acceleration. It's still getting faster and faster each second, the definition of acceleration, but it is slowed down from free fall, meaning that 90% of the strength has been removed. Only 10% of the columns are giving any resistance, or 10% of all the columns, one or the other. And so look at the columns in this building. I mean, it's getting faster and faster straight down through 240 core columns that are square steel tube columns, 14-inch square, and 47 massive core columns. So
wow,
how can that happen almost as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky? Not going to happen. So what's happening to those perimeter columns? They've been ejected laterally. 4-ton, 8-ton structural steel sections ejected at 80 miles an hour, landing 600 feet in every direction, destroying the Winter Garden 600 feet away, impaling themselves in skyscrapers around, including the Deutsche Bank building, and these particular structural steel sections ejected.
Could you go back two slides? I want to take a look at one more. The WFC Winter Garden 600 feet. What are we looking at? Is that a rooftop where something's crash landed onto it?
Yes, it's a glass atrium over the building called the Winter Gardens, which is between the two World Financial Center high rises.
Got it. And what you're saying happened here was you've got structural steel that's been ejected like missiles, and they come and they hit this thing.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
An extraordinary amount of energy required to eject these independently, freely flying sections. And this one about to hit this building 7.
Wow.
And so go forward to, back to, it's ejected laterally.
Mm-hmm.
How does gravity work? Down. What's going on here? Out. So this is an incredible display of the lateral ejection, trailing what? Again, thick white smoke clouds. Does steel get flammable in office fire or jet fuel conditions? No. Something else is happening here.
One more question for you, Richard, before you go on. In terms of all of building science history that you know of, has there ever been a building whose the top did begin to fall down on itself and floor by floor? Has that happened where it came down partially due to the top floor collapsing onto the next ones?
Well, that's called a progressive collapse.
Okay.
And for instance, in tilt-up frame construction, not tilt-up, but they jack up the floors. They pour them all one on top of the other, and then when they're dry, they lift them up.
Okay.
Around columns which poke through holes in the concrete floor slabs, and they've had accidents where they can fall on each other. It's a completely different situation because the columns are not providing the resistance; it's the attachment to the columns in that case. Which is dubious. But have I answered your question, Jeremy?
Well, kind of. I think what you're saying is no. A building constructed in the way that World Trade Center was constructed, there's not been ever a floor-by-floor collapse without it being a controlled demolition.
I think that's correct. I can tell you it more positively. There's never been a fire-induced collapse of any kind that's completely brought down a type 1 fire protected steel frame structure ever. And we have hundreds and hundreds of those and lots of examples of much hotter, larger, and longer lasting fires.
Beautiful is probably the wrong word here because of the tragedy, but in terms of controlled demolitions, I mean, when I was watching the World Trade Center 7 versus the others that you showed side by side, it almost seemed as if the World Trade Center 7 controlled demolition was the most well done. It was perfect.
Actually, that's an excellent point. They must be very proud of themselves, and particularly in that building, which they didn't murder anybody, probably feel better about the demolition there than at the Twin Towers, which murdered almost 3,000 people.
Maybe.
So how do you get these structural sections ejected laterally? It's a lot of force. More force than necessary to fire a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles. We've got to answer that question too. This was a 12 to 1,400 foot diameter. The debris was issued out beyond the World Trade Center boundaries, all the way out to the Winter Gardens, which is this picture we were looking at here, destroying them. By the way, Jeremy, if 100,000 tons of structural steel framing is distributed well outside the footprint, what's crushing the building? This is a third of the weight of the building. It's not available to crush the building. Maybe it's the concrete. But let's find out what happened to the concrete, because we had 110 floors in each tower, and each an acre in size. Concrete poured on metal decking supported by lightweight steel trusses. We're looking for 110 of these, each an acre in size, mangled up certainly at the bottom. Do we find it? No. All we see is a 4 or 6-story pile of miscellaneous metal and some columns. So what happened? In a real pancaking collapse, like this one in an earthquake in Mexico, we have pancakes, concrete floors stacked up. Where's the concrete? It is missing.
Okay.
Where'd it go? Oh, here it is. Pulverized in midair to a fine powder. What can do that? Well, you get, according to ASTM test C856, temperatures above 1,500 degrees can turn concrete into white powder. We have temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees. Could that have been what's happened to the concrete? Possibly, but 90,000 tons of concrete in each building has been pulverized to a fine powder and then spread out all the way through lower Manhattan from river to river in a 3 square mile area in a blanket 3 inches thick. Well,
when it says thermite painted onto the bottom side of the floors, that would have had to been done with the initial construction, correct?
Not necessarily. There were fireproofing upgrades, coincidentally, in the buildings in the months before 9/11. It could have been done then. Kevin Ryan explores this in his essay at digwithin.net. The essay is called Demolition Access to the World Trade Center Towers. And if that was the means to powderize the concrete, because you're right, thermite creates 3,000 plus degree temperatures, 4,000. and the concrete was powderized and spread over lower Manhattan, then how can it be available to crush the building? This is another third of the weight of the building. The steel was a third. Together, this is 2/3 the weight of the building that's not even available to crush the building. And yet,
so what you're saying is, like, when we look at that first picture over there, after like the top, even if you bought into the idea that the plane caused office fires that got hot enough to make the building somehow explode and do that at the top, it's going to stop there because everything, all the weight then is dispersed and gone, right? So the bottom half would still remain.
Well, if the building started to collapse as a result of the broken columns from the plane and the fire weakening the steel, right, it might have crumpled a little bit, but it wouldn't have gone all the way to the ground. Particularly with these features, with the laterally ejected steel and concrete throughout lower Manhattan, not available to crush the building. There's just no weight up there. And yet, Zdeněk Bazant, in this complex paper, used all of the weight of that building and fraudulently multiplied it ×2. This is what was found by the engineers when they decoded finally this obscure paper. They also decreased the column energy absorption capacity below the point of plane impacts by more than 3. It's completely rigged in favor of a collapse.
And he was like the head person with NIST that was studying this?
He's a professor at Northwestern University in Chicago that was hired by NIST to be their key theoretical basis for their column failure theory. So this fraud was called out very professionally, actually, by Tony Zambotti, Richard Johns, Gregory Zudolinski, and they submitted a paper. But the American Society of Civil Engineers wouldn't publish it in the Journal of Engineering Mechanics. Why? They said it was out of scope. Well, wait a minute. Why is it out of scope to publish a challenge to a previously published paper in that journal? This is what we do in peer-reviewed science. There's a lawsuit actually about this.
So in other words, if the stakes weren't so high, this challenges to existing published papers happen all the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is what you do.
Okay.
We had a problem with challenges to published papers during COVID in the last 4 years also. Same problem there.
Or even publish Instagram posts.
Yeah, channels get taken down. So we have a lot of evidence, 10 key characteristic features and some very uncharacteristic features of direct evidence of destruction with explosives. Fire doesn't create any one of these features, let alone all 10 of them. So with additional circumstantial evidence and corroborative testimony, we don't have time to get into, this becomes proof of controlled demolition, a body of proof that has convinced thousands of architects and engineers, many of which do appear as experts in our ongoing film series, which again, we're encouraging everybody to co-produce at 911c2c.org. And this is developing as a series of more than a dozen episodes, but we already have a classic documentary, 9/11 Explosive Evidence. Experts speak out with 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts, all laying out this evidence. And a documentary that's just 15 minutes, narrated by actor Ed Asner, only on Building 7. And a story about the Halsey study at Building 7, University of Alaska, which was commissioned to perform a 4-year study on the building, in which they said Building 7 could not have come down by fire. You would have had to remove all the columns in the building at once, within a fraction of a second of each other.
Yeah.
So all this evidence is outlined, and very clearly outlined in our brochure, which is available at richardgage911.org. And we've got to get to the bottom of this. I mean, we're talking about a $14 trillion war in Afghanistan, allegedly to capture Osama bin Laden, who was never captured. As it turns out, he died within a year after 9/11. But all of these consequences of 9/11 force us to go deeper and find out what really happened. It's a very dark truth about 9/11, and we have to decide, how much more do we put up with? Where do we draw our line in the sand? Do we wait for the next 9/11?
Right.
Well, it happened over the last 4 years, I hate to tell you. So it's time to speak the truth. And that's what we are telling architects and engineers and the public all around the country, Jeremy, every day. In an interview or speaking engagement, 800 speaking engagements, about an equal number of interviews. It just never stops. Now we've got, hopefully, as we mentioned, Representative Luna doing an investigation. We have Kurt Weldon doing a presidential investigation. Luna is in the Congress. And there's lots of reasons to be excited about our progress.
So you see forward momentum in a new way with the new administration?
A lot more than the old administration,
Right, yeah,
I can
yeah.
say that. Are we banking on it? No.
Yeah.
We're continuing to have speaking engagements and interviews, trying to wake up the public, trying to get Tucker Carlson to do something other than dabble his feet in the water. Same with Joe Rogan.
Has Candace Owens called you, talked to you? Has she ever had you on her show?
No, not yet. We need to get her going.
I think she'd be willing to do it. She's actually living here in my hometown.
Would you talk to her for us?
If I can ever get a hold of her myself. But I will do what I can.
Any of you at home who know Candace, just send her this podcast and the brochure on our website, richardgage911.org.
Absolutely. So let me see. Where do I start with this? I guess, one thing that's been incredibly frustrating for me is it's not like you've got one slam dunk here. You got about 100 slam dunks. I mean, when it comes to you've proved the point over and over and over again. And there's a growing awakening of the people and people up to a certain level, like former Congressman Kurt Weldon. And I'm saying he's at a pretty high level being a former congressman, but it seems like once you step into the level of a Pete Hegseth or maybe a Kash Patel, or maybe, I'm not saying that they're not open to hearing the presentation, but I've just not seen any real interest from them other than saying to the public, hey, we're going to expose these files. I would love for one of them to talk to you. So I guess my first question is, what's like the highest level politician or somebody that's, I guess in Congress that is really listening to this outside of Kurt Weldon?
Well, nobody is really listening to this. We did have some attention, some great attention from Cynthia McKinney before she was railroaded out of Congress.
Yes.
About a dozen years ago, I believe. And also Jim Himes, who wrote NIST a letter saying, hey, look at this evidence that these architects showed me about thermite. Did you investigate this? And NIST wrote back a mealy mouth excuse that there's aluminum cladding on the outside of these buildings, and there's steel that's been rusted inside, so they mixed on the way down and must have created some little thermite problems.
Why did you begin to look at October 7th in Israel, Gaza, and begin to make those parallels?
We had COVID come upon us, and it was so clear to me that it was a false disease, meaning it was not created by bats. And everybody was calling that out early on, and it became a big conspiracy, a cover-up to contain that conspiracy. And then it turns out it was created in the lab, and it turns out that the vaccines they began to push were created before the pandemic ever happened. and that Gates and the CDC and even the WHO had patents on the disease itself and Moderna, and as well as the vaccine. So I'm going, this stinks to high heaven. So we looked at a set of parallels that are really rather extraordinary. It turns out they use the same playbook. For instance, there's foreknowledge evidenced by insider trading, where people made millions in each of these events, 9/11 and COVID. There's predictive programming. They tell us what they're going to do before they do it. There's drills, such as Event 201 in the case of COVID.
Yes,
and there's 40 drills in the case of 9/11. We have the complete abuse of science with the NIST report that we just discussed, and by most of the mainstream scientists who are trying to pull this fast one on us with COVID. They create a climate of fear in which to manipulate us, right? Terrorists in our neighborhoods. In the case of 9/11, in the case of COVID, it's this virus that you can't quite get your hands on, and it could kill you. You know, you could kill grandma if you're not careful. They create a solution, the quote vaccine, that's far worse than the original problem, both of which turn out to be bioweapons created by our own Defense Department, which is in collusion with BioNTech, Ralph Barrick, and others.
Yes,
Gates, Fauci, the NIH is deep into this, which is why he's going to prison pretty soon, even though he was pardoned back to 2014.
You think he'll be in prison?
Yeah,
that would be amazing.
Yeah, I do. That's just my speculation. We have false accounts by officials. Another parallel, in order to keep the narrative running, which they exhibit extreme control of. There's no real investigation. The 9/11 Commission was a complete joke, didn't even mention the collapse of Building 7, much less any of the evidence that we brought to bear today. Mm-hmm. There's an elusive, powerful enemy, these terrorists with the terror meter going up to orange or red, creating this climate of fear. And of course, this virus, which you better wear that mask because you don't know what you could die from just by breathing next to somebody who has. All of this has been proven false. And we go into depth, by the way, in our 2-hour presentation on this subject at richardgage911.org. But the control of information and this shifting narrative, as the public wakes up to these narratives, they shift it and they begin to try to contain the damage. There's media censorship, of course, and attacks on critical questioning. By the media and the government, the implementation of draconian policies. Right. We're going to not only make you wear masks, lock you down, and stand 6 feet apart, and not go to work, and shut down $1 trillion damage to our economy, but we're going to track you. And the way they do that with what's in the vaccines is absolutely incredible. And we've uncovered that in that 2-hour presentation as well. And we have predictive programming in both of these cases, more than 100 examples that the 9/11 Truth Movement has come up with of the towers under attack, in some cases by Muslims with bombs, well before, decades before even, as well as months and a year before 9/11. And predictive programming of the COVID pandemic as well.
And the purpose of predictive programming, and most of my audience will know this, but it's to make it more realistic and not palatable, but like it's something that could, when it actually does happen, it's already been in people's minds, so it doesn't seem that unrealistic, correct?
Because Hollywood has portrayed it in a way that goes into the subconscious of the viewers of all of these various movies and entertainment, and even the Olympics of 2012. where they have in the Olympic halftime, not halftime, pre-show opening ceremony.
Yeah.
They have 100 hospital beds with sick children in them. This is supposed to inspire athletes, right? With a gigantic gargoyle-like person, creature with a needle-like object in his hand.
I remember that. Wow.
All the way back to 2012. So those are examples of predictive programming that most of them are unconscious, like in that case. But you're injecting fear. You're injecting the meme of sickness. The famous murals on the actual the walls of the Denver airport. Sick children, gas from all nations, with masks, which are like the flags of their nations over their face.
Yeah. So I was asking you about October 7th, and you went to Old State Saloon recently and gave, I thought, a phenomenal presentation. And once I asked you, you went to more talking about the parallels between COVID and 9/11, which I agree, they're there. But was it a similar thing in the case of October 7th?
Yeah, when I saw that, it just stunk. On the spot reporting, for instance, this is with AP and Reuters, embedded reporters with the terrorists, and there's only any photos of about a dozen of them. There's no more photos that have any. They told us there were, I don't know, 1,000 or more, so I started looking at this and I realized, hey, it's problem, reaction, solution. Once again, the same playbook as 9/11. They create the original problem, the attack, right? What are the components of that? Well, previous to the attacks, there are established geostrategic goals coveting the natural resources of the target territory. That's a whole hour, that parallel, just diving into what Israel really wanted in Gaza. They created and founded and funded Hamas in the first place, and gave them over 1.4 billion, according to a top official in Israel, in order to act as a foil against the PLO in the West Bank. So they created this Frankenstein, and they were in control of it, and they were embedded in it with Mossad operatives, so they knew exactly what was going on. Why? Because they had established goals of a greater Israel, which included the Balkanization of surrounding Arab states as a major goal, which was betrayed by General Wesley Clark 2 weeks after 9/11, even, in which he said that we're going to take down 7 countries in 5 years. Well, most of those, except the final one, Iran, has been achieved. Well, why? They have to break the resistance of the Israeli expansion. Why do they want to expand into Gaza in particular? Well, that's where the gas finds 1.2 trillion cubic feet of gas and a whole lot of oil amounting to $500 billion in profits, belonging to who? The Gazan people right outside of Gaza. But if you can brand them as terrorists, and then you don't have to negotiate with terrorists, right?
Yeah.
Well, they've been releasing contracts for exploring Gazans' oil and gas because they also want to ship it through the East Mediterranean pipeline, a $50 billion project, which would take that oil and gas on up into Cyprus, Turkey, and Europe. So that is a major project which has never gotten mainstream media attention, but which is underway. And we also have something else going on, another $50 billion project to connect the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. The Suez Canal already does this, but it is quite limited and full of problems, nationalized by by Egypt, not deep enough, not wide enough, only one-way traffic. But the Ben Gurion Canal, which has been planned for decades, is twice the width, twice the depth, allow an aircraft carrier through there, and two-way traffic. So that would bring the oil laden ships from the Persian Gulf, which could then dump their oil into this pipeline where? Immediately outside of Gaza. They can't do all this with the Gazan people there, with the terrorists there.
Yep.
And if they did, they'd have to negotiate with them and share these profits, which they apparently don't want to do. So that's why you have Trump, who's been paid $200 million by the Adelsons
over the last two campaigns, right? $100 million each.
Yeah, I thought it was 200 just in this one, but
APAC has given 200 million approximately. Then you got the 100 million from the Adelson family. So just this last campaign alone, but if you call it all the Jewish lobby or Israeli lobby, whatever, $300 million. So it's a massive golden handcuff on him.
So they own America through him, and that's why he's now discussing moving the people out of Gaza. And they don't want to move out of Gaza. They want their homeland, and they want it rebuilt because 80% of the housing has been completely destroyed in an obvious genocide. It's not just killing most of the people, which they killed 50,000 Gazans already, but moving them forcibly is the definition of genocide also. So, and yet that's what Trump is talking about, and we know why. All of these reasons. They want to redevelop it, make it a seaside, beautiful community, as Trump describes. So anyway, all of these are part of Parallel 1, coveting the natural resources of the target territory. Parallel 2 goes into the rich history of recent and historic provocations and false flag operations, which the U.S. has been used to create every war, and Israel also. Sinking of the attempted sinking of the USS Liberty is a perfect example of a false flag operation blamed on Egypt, but busted wide open. So they just try to hush it down afterward. Parallel 3, politically useful controlled patsies, having developed Hamas. Parallel 4, a triggering event with an innovative attack with dubious origins, a manufactured invasion from foreign operatives. So the hijacked airliners are patsies developed by the CIA, put into flight school, failed flight school. It's all a big show. They probably weren't even on the planes, which were in all likelihood remotely controlled. And so we
Quick
have
question on the remote control. I've wanted to ask somebody that would know this for a while, and you might. Wasn't at that time, we knew that planes could be remote controlled. That was technology at that point that had been used for a long time. But wasn't there someone with the Pentagon at that time that was involved with the patents of particular plane remote control technology?
Yes, the comptroller of the Pentagon, Dov Zakheim, owned the company that has remote controls on planes today, and before 9/11, they were developing this.
And he was involved in shaping somewhat. I mean, he had involvement with the 9/11 narrative on some level, correct? In his position?
Oh yeah. Well, in shaping it, well,
being a part of it in the way that it
probably. I mean, he was involved at high levels with Rumsfeld at the Pentagon.
There we go.
Inevitably, they were shaping it together. A lot of these individuals are actually dual citizens with Israel and the U.S. In fact, most of the Project for a New American Century individuals who developed that think tank, which they put their goals on a paper called Rebuilding America's Defenses on the website, pnac.org. And they outlined, before they came into power with the Bush administration, their goals: regional hegemony in the Middle East, ability to fight 2 wars, a vast increase in the military budget. But they said, absent a catalyzing and catastrophic event like a new Pearl Harbor, these goals will likely take a long, long time, the process of change.
Yeah.
And so Bush writes in his diary that night, today we had our new Pearl Harbor. So this is all examples of foreknowledge. It's examples of suspicious benefits for insiders. Many of these parallels have been developed originally by Kevin Ryan. We just expanded on them and turned them into a full-blown 2-hour presentation with all the backup that we have. We have foreknowledge of the attacks. The Israelis knew that the Hamas was going to invade. We knew that the towers were going to be hit. The massive intelligence coming in the case of Israel from Egypt, who even tried to warn Netanyahu personally that something terrible was about to happen. Well, there's plenty of foreknowledge in the military who took no action whatsoever. In fact, they abandoned their bases. Hamas videos found no one to fight with at these bases, at the fence, and largely during the attack on the communities of Israel. There's dancing Israelis at the time of the attack in 9/11. There's another parallel. We have them dancing holding a lighter up to the Twin Towers, which were burning, and they're dancing. They were arrested by the FBI and finally let go after 75 days in captivity. They were let go because they had ties to the Mossad. That's not the reason, but that's one of the other things that they found. Well, they're also dancing while in Israel, while Israel's under attack by rockets. Well, what did they know that they weren't afraid of these attacks? We show all of this evidence. And so all of that is the creation of the original problem. Then we go into the series of parallels that are the actual management of the public reaction, including massive propaganda in each case, outrageous slogans from the government and media to manipulate our emotions, atrocities that are alleged to the enemy with ensuing dehumanization of them, right? The worst of the worst, Rumsfeld calls these characters in Guantanamo. That's why we can now torture them, because they're not really human, they're animals. And so we can waterboard them. Same in Israel, they're tortured and treated horribly, the Hamas captives. But then the enemy denies. They go, "What are you talking about? I didn't do this." Osama bin Laden said, "I didn't do this." If you want to know who did this, look to the shadow government within your own government who wants to make this century a century of conflict between Islam and Christianity.
Richard, are you like me in the sense of these are not things that you wanted to find out? Like these are not like, this is not convenient for me. You know, I grew up in a church that almost, venerated Israel almost to the point of worship. And I've walked away from all that, not church, but I've walked away from that particular belief. And then, you know, in politics, it's like these senators and congressmen wake up every day, and the first thing they've got to do is get on X and talk about how much they love and support our greatest ally, Israel. And I'm thinking, it drives me nuts, because it's just like, do they just not want to know? I understand getting paid off, but has that been, I guess the question for you is that frustrating for you? Because I think even 2 years ago, you weren't quite saying as much in terms of the whodunit as even you are now.
Well, I don't know who done it. I know who's suspicious and who needs investigations. It seems clear that there's some involvement by Israel. I don't know that they're the dog wagging the tail or vice versa. When in 2006 or after 2001 to 2006, I was, I wanted to go into Afghanistan and Iraq and get those bastards who did this to us.
Me too. Yeah.
Right. Colin Powell making his irrefutable case for weapons of mass destruction. Yeah. Ties to Osama bin Laden with Saddam Hussein. I wanted to expose all of that. I was a flag waving Reagan Republican.
Yeah.
I was not ready for any of this. It turned my world upside down. And no, I'm not happy doing this, but I have to show people these parallels so that they wake up and realize that the next one is going to come too.
Yeah.
You know, they're expecting a new pandemic. They've given this to us in 4 different predictive programming exercises, and well, all with foreknowledge of it. Peter Hotez says that Trump is going to have to deal with another pandemic right away in his administration.
Yeah.
He's a medical official of some kind. Well, then they offer the prescribed solution after killing journalists, by the way, which is part of their reaction. They target journalists. We targeted Al Jazeera in Iraq, for instance. There's a military revenge attack that's been prepared in advance after no investigation of the original attack, right? Because they obfuscate that. They occupy the territory of the enemy. We're in Iraq and Afghanistan. This is the land grab. Israel's in doing their best to subdue Gaza, which they have invaded and occupied. They widen the conflict to achieve the original broader goals. This is extremely important. We widened the conflict outside of Afghanistan almost immediately to take over Iraq. Why? Well, Iraq and Afghanistan are surrounding what country? The 7th country that Wesley Clark said we're going to take down, with dozens and dozens of military bases to the north and south of Iran. So just think about how all this works together. They affect regime change of the enemy leadership. They enact a forever war policy against them. Billions flow to the arms industry and media and the banking industry, the oil industries. Extreme public censorship by government, mainstream media, and social media. In Israel, you can be put in jail for 5 years by challenging the official narrative about the attack by Hamas on Israel. And that is extremely draconian. There's no free speech there. It's not a democracy anymore.
Well, it's a signal that there's something to hide. If you can't ask questions, that's the thing you got to look at.
Yep, and they're more surveilled than they ever were. The Israeli people themselves, not just Hamas. And of course, we are. All of our emails, our phone calls, our texts are systematically swept up and stored in the largest building in Utah for use against us later, completely unconstitutional.
You know, in your presentation the other day from Old State, you mentioned that, and you said in Utah. What's the significance there? That it's
I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe it's central United States, but this is an extremely expensive building, which has to be cooled with a whole power little city of power generators.
Its own little power plant.
Yeah. And then, so finally, the final parallel is to look deeper than just the geostrategic goals. It's to go back 250 years and find out where all of this effort to control and subvert governments came from. At least that far back. I'm sure it goes further back than that, but we're talking about Adam Weishaupt, the creator of the Illuminati, and Sabbatai Levi and Jacob Frank, his successor, who Jacob Frank and Adam Weishaupt conspired with Rothschild and met and created these secret societies and the subversion of monarchies and at the time and governments and institutions. That was their stated goal. And they've done a great job of it if you look at history. So yeah, it all has to be looked at.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. Sometimes I feel like I'm living in a dream, that the fact that guys like you are out there spreading, the message and with a lot of shows and on a lot of platforms, and many people, I'd say half the public in America, at least know that the mainstream narrative about 9/11 wasn't true. But you go up to the level of the people in politics that can actually do something about it, and they just still look the other way. I'm shocked by that. I do hope that I hope that your hopes are correct, and that Kash Patel and Trump and Anna Paulina Luna and others are really serious about their investigation. I wanted to ask you: have you ever been threatened?
No.
You have not.
It's kind of disappointing, actually. You would think if I'm over the target,
yeah.
and the 9/11 Truth Movement's over the target, there'd be a lot more reprisal. And I'm just delighted to share that I haven't gotten a phone call, even or any money offers. So it would be comforting to have some of that, as well as uncomfortable.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear it. I just thought that perhaps it might have happened at some point, just considering the huge nature of what you're talking about and how it would overturn so many. I mean, if what we're talking about in terms of the geopolitical things, and I know you're not saying that it was Israel that did it. I do personally believe that. I've come to that conclusion just on my own, research and with presentations like yours and many others. And I want to commend you on your boldness to even explore these topics when so many people just won't do it. And I think that that's the number one thing that's good that could allow it to happen again, is when nobody's looking in the right directions because out of fear, or they're told not to, or they may lose something. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for your boldness. What is next for you, Richard?
Oh, I just have to keep providing fuel to the fire. I think the American people are waking up. Our cross-pollination of these different 9/11 and COVID, in particular, truth groups has yielded a lot of good results. We've been invited on health and freedom websites to bring the truth about 9/11. And the 9/11 truth groups have to be awakened to the truth about what happened with COVID and how dangerous that false flag operation was. So together they create an incredible force of waking up, because they are the Gog and Magog, I think, that can wake up the American people.
Interesting you said Gog and Magog. Do you hold to any particular religious faith yourself?
Sure. I'm essentially Christian.
Okay, essentially Christian. All right. Well, Richard, that's really all the questions that I had today. I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much for the presentation of 9/11 as always, and then especially the boldness you've had on October 7th and on COVID. So I commend you. Thank you for being a hero in the truth movement. And I will put all the links that we've discussed today in the description. You have any final words?
Yes. Don't sit on this information, you guys. Take this podcast with Jay Slay and send it everywhere. If just two of you send it to two others, and they send it to two others, and they all send it to two others, we've done this. We've got it done. But people aren't aware of the destruction of these three buildings. And if they can be, like you just have been, then we can win this battle. We can put the necessary pressure on the Trump team to look at this evidence that we'll be providing them next week. So yeah, do something. Don't sit there.
Thank you. Absolutely. Well, that's awesome, Richard. Thank you so much for coming on. And we will see you again soon, guys, right here on Jay Slay, Made in the USA.